And we go back to the room, and the next morning we wake up and the doctors come in and they say, we have no answers. We have no idea. It didn't show us anything. It wasn't helpful at all.
Traumatic.
It was terrible. And so the doctor comes in that day and he says, I really don't know what to do. We can't keep any food in him. And so the best thing we know to do is to keep him comfortable. And, we've all watched enough movies to know like what that means. And it's the worst bedside manner, like the worst thing you could possibly say to a parent. And he leaves the office or the room, and he's heading to his office. And I walked down, I couldn't catch him, but I caught his interns. And I just said, I refuse it. Like, I refuse that the solution here is to make him comfortable and to let him die. And so you guys need to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
We're not leaving till you figure it out. And I was probably a weepy mess. And I called my sister and I said, I need you to bring me an Nalgene bottle of gin to the hospital. And she did. And within 20 minutes, she lived there in the same town. And so within 20 minutes, she's at my room, and I go to the vending machine and I get this styrofoam cup with like this crushed ice, and I pour gin in it. No tonic, no lime. And I just guzzle this like huge styrofoam glass of gin. And that was the moment when I just decided, like, I didn't want to feel anymore. Like, if he was going to die, I didn't want to feel it. If we were going to go through a struggle with his health, I didn't want to feel it. I didn't want to feel anything. The pain was so acute. And it wasn't just like the pain of the death of a son. It was the potential death of a son. It was the pain that, like, in my moment when I needed God to show up the most, he didn't. He was not there. I didn't feel him. I didn't see him. And he certainly wasn't working in my son's life. And it was too much. And so for me, like, when I talk about pain and addiction and how the two go hand in hand, I believe that to be true based on everybody I've ever spoken with. But for me, those things were acutely tied, and it wasn't just like some I cut my arm or something pain, or even just like I lost my dog, and so I'm now, it's a bad country song. I lost my job, and now I'm going out and drinking a 6-pack. It was this existential pain of, where are you, God?
Yeah.
If you even exist.
Yeah. And for you, at that time, did you know that you were making a conscious decision to sort of drown out the pain, or was that just something you were able to see in retrospect?
No, 100%. Like, before that time, I think I still had a drinking problem. I would have ticked all the boxes, In fact, AA has, they have a checklist that you go down to see if you have a drinking problem. And before that time, I would have totally had it. And if I would have taken the test and seen the check marks, I would have been like, okay, technically maybe that's true, but I can quit anytime I want.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I had at one point told Amber, like, I can quit whenever I want. But when that happened in the hospital, it was, I'm done. I don't want to feel. This is the thing that helps me not feel.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So for you, walking out of that time, actually, do you want to can you tell us about Titus now, just so that we're not left hanging with your little boy and his story?
Yeah, he's doing really well. I tell people all the time, he still struggles a little with just height and weight gain, but I tell people all the time, like, if you could see him, you wouldn't feel sorry for me. He's so happy. He's so full of joy. He's so full of life. What ended up happening, to kind of put a bow on the story, was this doctor was rotating off the floor, and there were these two GIs, and they were arch nemesis. Like, they hated each other. And he rolled off the floor, and the other doctor came in, and he looked at the chart, and he said, he's done everything that he's supposed to do. I have this one idea. It's really risky and it might not work. And essentially the idea was that they were going to begin to feed tube him less than he needed to survive. And if he could keep that down for a day, then they would increase it by just like one little bit. And so they would do that over time. And he said, like, I think we have enough time to pull this off. And it worked. So Titus gets out of the hospital. We have another few years of really sort of touch and go health, but he made it, and he's super happy and doing really well now.
Okay, so Seth, Titus is doing well. He gets out of the hospital. Titus is doing okay. You've decided to use alcohol at that time to numb the pain. Are you still in pain? I mean, you still, obviously you're still using alcohol after that. So it wasn't like, oh, Titus is okay. I'm fine. I'll go back to the sort of socially acceptable level of alcoholism maybe
Yeah.
that you had before. What was that like?
Yeah, so there's a couple things about pain. One is that particularly when we're talking about existential pain or emotional pain or spiritual pain, once that's triggered, it doesn't really go away unless you deal with it,
Yeah.
right? So the idea that God wasn't there continued. Like it didn't ever go away. It's not like we got out of the hospital and all of a sudden I felt God's miraculous hand come into my life and begin to work. It's
Yeah.
not like I felt him speaking to me in the scriptures or that I felt him in worship anymore. Like I didn't. I felt nothing. And there was a long swath of time, probably 2 years, where it felt really touch and go. Like he could relapse at any point. In fact, um, I guess a year after we got out of the hospital, maybe more than that, but it was right around a year. Yeah, it was right around a year and a couple months after he got out of the hospital. I mean, he was at Mayo Clinic
Mm.
and they were still trying to figure out like what is wrong with him. So I was still really wrestling with this idea that God was not there, that he wasn't present, that he wasn't operating. In fact, I wrote in Coming Clean that I was kind of left with this idea that if there even was a God, he was capricious. And that's kind of how I viewed it. And so there's really no way to go back to socially acceptable levels of drinking when your entire faith construct is really deconstructing before your eyes, and it is because of existential pain.
Yeah. Why do you think you didn't just walk away from faith entirely at that time?
Yeah, I don't really like any answer that I can come up with to that, because it bends a lot of my theological beliefs, leanings, and rules. Um, I think for whatever reason, God really just held on tight,
Mm.
and almost like, and this is going to sound really probably melodramatic, but I use the phrase like grab you by the throat a lot. And I think that's in my writing. And I think there's a reason for that. The reason for that is I felt like, even though I couldn't breathe, even though I couldn't stand upright, it was still God like grabbing me by the throat and saying,
Mm.
I'm not going to let you go. Um, and that's a really tough thing to say, because I know, again, like a lot of people have theological issues with that or could have theological issues with that. But for me, it just felt like he wouldn't let me go.
Mm. And where's Amber in all of this? Does she see a growing problem, or is this totally hidden from her? What's that like as far as within your home? Or
Yeah,
is
I
this all
mean,
just in yourself?
no. So she totally starts to see it in that. So from the time that we got out of the hospital, it was about a year and a month that I really drank hard before quitting. And in that time, she does see some of that, but I'm also hiding a lot of it. So for me, I start moving my drinks into my office at the end of the day, and so I would do things like begin to drink at 4:30, and then at 4, and then at 3:30, and then at 3, and then by the time I would get home, I would like go straight to the liquor cabinet and pour a gin and tonic, so that if she smelled anything on my breath, she would just think, "Oh, it's the gin that you just poured," right?
Mm.
So there was a lot of hiding. There were moments when we were drinking together, and so there were moments when we would have gin and tonics, and then she would get up to go to the restroom while we were watching our favorite show. And when she got up to go to the restroom, I would go top off my drink. And so I would pour doubles instead of singles. I would top off my drink when she was out of the room.
Mm.
I would do all these little things. And we actually talked about it just last night. And she was saying, one, she was sort of dealing with her own depression and way of dealing with this. But two, what made it really difficult was um, that I just really hold my liquor well. Like I always say all the time, like if there's one thing I was really good at and meant to do,
Hmm.
it's drink. Like I'm really good at drinking. It's a talent. And so I think a lot of it was just hidden based on the fact that, yeah, just I'm good at hiding.
Yeah, yeah. You talk about in coming clean. You say that the toasting of joy and drowning of sorrow are closer than you think. I would love for you to talk about that a little bit, because those two things feel very polar opposite, joy and sorrow. But you're actually saying that they're closer than you think. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think most equal and opposite emotions are actually kissing cousins. Um, and this is actually a really long philosophical answer, but the long answer short is that I think that there are times when we um, try to mask our sorrow with joy. So we try to pivot out of the sorrow and into joy really quickly. And I think a lot of that is that we, for me, spiritually speaking, it's almost like uh, you try to pivot away from the death into the resurrection. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Um, like, so if something's really dark, you gin up a really good party in order to like kind of get the darkness away.
Hmm.
And I think that's a lot of what I was doing in that space and in that season. I was really hurting. I was really in pain. And so the thing that I would do because I was in pain was gin up a reason to have a party, gin up a reason to drink. I remember I have a really dear friend. His name is Mike. And I started calling him Whiskey Mike because we have so much fun when he's drinking whiskey. Um, and so we were getting together almost every weekend. We were having these dinner parties, and he was getting really hammered, and so was I. Um, and then after I got sober, we were talking one day, and he said, when you got sober, I had to really step back and look at my relationship to alcohol. And every time I was getting drunk, there was a common denominator, and it was you. And it was a
Wow.
really painful thing to hear, but like I would be at his house, we would have dinner, and then I would go to his liquor cabinet and I would bring out two handles of whiskey and we'd get after it. And so I think one of the things, particularly as we're dealing with addiction, um, and if you can't really suss out, like, do you have a problem? Do you not have a problem? Then the question is like, are you constantly turning to a mode of celebration in order to mute the pain?
Hmm.
Right? So
Hmm.
are you always turning to a party to have fun in order to mute the pain?
Hmm.
Are you constantly turning to internet shopping? Oh, this is really great. I found this new grade. That's awesome, to mute the pain.
Hmm.
Are you constantly turning to sex, even sex within marriage, in order to mute the pain? Um, and so for me, that's a real it's a light bulb for me. Like when I look at the pleasures of my life and I ask myself, am I using them to mute the pain? That's really what I'm saying. Am I using joy as a tool to sort of mute the sorrow?
Yeah. And so, what was the moment for you, or was there a series of moments when you realized, okay, there's actually a problem here that I don't want to live with, And it seems like you knew there was a problem for a while, but you were okay with the problem because it was helping you cope. Is that fair to say?
Oh, 100%.
Okay, and so you know this is going on, but you're being secretive. Amber doesn't totally know the extent of it. Like, what's the catalyst for you to actually come clean? Like, was there a moment? Was there a series of things? Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, I mean, there probably, if we went back and I was super honest, I could probably point to a series of moments. But there was one moment in particular, and I was in Austin. Again, I'm an attorney, so I've kind of always been involved in Christian circles and Christian writing circles.